and artist talk of Mr. Martin Webb. We're made for you and me, obviously it's the title of the show. You can tell us what that's about a little bit with the individual pieces. We'll kick things off with Woody Guthrie's This Land Is Your Land, which is, there's underlying lyrics on all of these pieces from that song. So cue the song, and then that, and then we'll take it with Martin. Yay!
Do I have to mind the song?
You gotta dance.
Karaoke.
Give us a sec.
Can we just sing it?
You know it?
we could outlaw with it instead.
There you
Oh,
go.
there we go.
New York Island, redwood forest, the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. I was walking and living up highways. This land is your land. This land is my land.
That's the show.
Your island, redwood forest, Gulf Stream waters. This land is made for you and me. When the sun shines, and I was strolling, we feel the wave, the sunflower rolling. Boys come chanting, horses whipping. This land is made.
Martin had a really nice write-up in the Huffington Post by James Scarborough, where he said, "To experience the work in Made for You and Me, new work by Martin Webb, is to come across sophisticated folk art, conceptually vigorous, visually intriguing folk art, in some out-of-the-way place you stop on the way to somewhere else." So with that, Martin Webb, maybe you can give us a brief intro about yourself, if folks don't know, and we can talk about this particular show. And if you guys have any questions throughout the talk, feel free to raise your hand when you're inspired, and we'll take it from there. We'll catch you.
Sure.
Take it away.
Okay, so thanks for being here. And, I'm originally from England and been in this space for 10 years and was an artist and an art teacher, which is what got me out here in the first place, and then did design work, and I've been gradually sort of focusing more and more on my own personal artwork over the last few years and kind of building that up to a sort of more or less full-time thing. It's actually very difficult to do a little elevator speech about this show because it's kind of it's a little kind of nebulous looking at it. It doesn't explain itself very easily, but I tend to like art that doesn't explain itself immediately, and you have to kind of spend a bit of time figuring it out. So probably the good place to start is the song. I kind of was aware of that song, but I wasn't really aware of it as being sort of how iconic it was right until it was sung at Obama's first inauguration, and then I think I started thinking about it a little, and the sort of full version of that song talks about the land, and it talks about people, it talks about the sort of natural environment, and it talks about industry and agriculture and sort of preserving people's rights and access to that land, and it talks about sort of urban development and how people fit into that, and how people move around for economic reasons. When I looked at it, I thought, well, that's actually what the last 7 or 8 years of my work has kind of touched on, all of those different things. And a lot of that has been as a result of being a newcomer to this country and sort of processing that and thinking about your own experience migrating. So the song, I thought, that's actually a really good thing to kind of hinge this show around. And I was looking back at sort of 7 or 8 years worth of work, and I always think it's kind of good to figure out a way forward by kind of looking back and see what worked and what didn't work and what you want to develop. And I was sort of pulling out images and ideas that I'd sort of touched on from older work, and thought, well, if there's more mileage in that, I should have actually developed that further, and was sort of trying to pull a lot of threads of older work into this new stuff. So that was kind of like the intention of this show, was really to try and pull together all these threads from lots of other work and put it into something that made sense and kind of explained itself much better. And it probably doesn't. I don't think it really succeeded in doing that at all. It's actually kind of just made some more interesting work. I don't think it actually kind of concluded that at all. It sort of made more ambiguity, really. So that was that. The song was kind of like this idea of that would help pull things together. And the way I used it is kind of a way I've done. I've used verbal material before, which is I painted all the panels with the lyrics of the song first of all, and which actually on a little iPad there, you can flick through the iPad on the counter there, and there's some images of things in progress, and you see them. There's just these panels full of lyrics at the beginning, and that's kind of a fun thing to do because, you know, being faced with lots of blank panels is kind of daunting, and once you've got something on there, whatever it is, it makes it so much easier. So it's a good way of spending a couple of days sort of getting over those nerves of creating something new. So it's kind of nice for that. It was, while I was working on them, having all these words there was a good kind of reminder of what I was aiming at, and also just sort of visually, it's good because you see these words popping up in sort of random places, and even when you don't, when they're kind of buried, they sort of pop up as little bits of fragmented texture in different places, which I think is interesting. It just makes the surfaces of the pieces much richer, sort of thing. So, yeah, that's how the song.
How does the song, maybe as an Englishman coming to mind, what's your view on that song? And is it pessimistic? Does it make you feel warm and fuzzy inside when you think of America and that particular song? Because it's a poignant song in more than one way.
Yeah.
What's your view on that song?
Well, I thought it's both. It's kind of like warm and fuzzy, but it's a warm and fuzzy protest song as well, because it was written in depression, and there's some verses that are sometimes missed out. When I started researching it online, every time I found a version of it, it would be different to the other versions. And he added some sort of increasingly political verses to it, things about rights. There's a thing about personal property. There's something about a sign saying private property, but the backside don't say nothing.
Yeah.
All of which seem to be really relevant to now too, you know, because I guess that song, I noticed it back in 2008, so that was as the recession was kind of hitting, and then, you know, everything that's gone through that song is very relevant, so the social, environmental level, all those things. So, that's the kind of mixed feelings that I was exploring a little with the paintings, I think. But I certainly if it disappears, that's okay. But it gets the ball rolling, and we'll see where the images go beyond that.
I'm wondering if it gave you an outside perspective, maybe, because these are so American. This work, and just as a real subject matter, but obviously in a really fresh, contemporary, in your own way.
Yeah.
You're more American than a lot of painters are if they're trying to portray themselves as being American painters.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, I actually was always a big fan of a lot of American art, actually. As a painter, you know, I was always like really interested in the abstract expressionists, you know, when I was sort of first studying painting, and there's a lot of American art that always interested me. So
It's kind of a bold honesty to it too.
Yeah.
Like a barn construction, or, you know, just being on a farm, working simple but honest, you know, in your technique and in your representations.
Yeah, and there's actually from the sort of 50s and 60s, there's a group of and they moved down and they started a sort of community down there. The most famous people from that are Henry Moore, the sculptor. There's a lot of great painters too, and that their art was always around everywhere when I was growing up. It would always be the kind of fading prints that were in the school office. You know, they'd always be from that era and those artists. But yeah, I really identify with some of those concerns, and they were really concerned about this sort of about the countryside and the rural way of life and things like that. And then when I came here, the work that I was doing for the first few years was kind of like involved with design and construction, and we traveled around a lot. And the people I was working for loved the Western desert, so they would, you know, if we had to go to a trade show in Las Vegas, they would take this long route through Death Valley and Bodie and all these places kind of on the way and introduce me to all that, which was just fabulous stuff. So yeah, that's maybe where the kind of Americana creeps in. Yeah. Images, the different objects and so on that are in the paintings what I tend to do is, starting something like this, I'll have kept a lot of notes, and I'll have little sketches and little sort of groups of images that I might use, and I pin them all on the studio wall. I have lots of lists of things that I might use, and lists of sort of intentions and ideas about the work, but I don't tend to plan out compositions, or you know, how I'm going to use them and how I'm going to arrange them, or even how I'm going to combine them. So, you know, if there's like a crow and a house here, I didn't really plan that out. That started off with a sort of abstract background, and then a house, and then a space. What's going to work. So, I guess how it's not remotely sort of illustrative of the lyrics or anything. It's much more.
Christy Moore did a really nice studio visit with Martin on Open Embers. Is it openembers.com or Blogspot? You guys should check it out if you're interested in seeing Martin's studio and just kind of seeing his studio world.
Yeah, I just started these too at that time.
Yeah. It's interesting to see how they've changed, and to know how many layers there are.
Right. So the kind of design and construction work that I was doing was involved putting designs onto concrete floors, and we used this compound that was used for resurfacing concrete, and It's like a very fine sand and cement with some acrylic in it. And basically I mix my own paint using that as a base. So I take that kind of cement acrylic mix and I can put liquid pigments or dry pigments or acrylic paint into that. So I just have a grey or a white cement base and then add colour into that, and that's what I paint with.
It's kind of your own technique, would you say? I mean, it's
Yeah.
not being used,
Yeah.
those mediums aren't being used in this format, right?
Yeah, I mean, really, I mean, people add stuff to paint. I mean, people have added sand and stuff to paint to give it texture and body. Being just a paint that allows me to kind of layer and sand things away in a really nice way. I keep actually trying to find other ways of doing it that don't involve, because the cement, because it's a chemical reaction, once you've mixed it, it's going to go hard and set. So it means you're throwing away a lot. And I keep trying to find a way of doing it without the cement that gives me the same result. And I haven't found anything that works. I would if I could.
It's a pain, yeah.
Yeah, I have to buy these big tubs of this material and 5-gallon buckets of the acrylic that you mix it with. And it's kind of bulky to have around the studio.
What's your work time on that deal?
If I put it on the panel and it's a kind of a warm day, it'll be set in half an hour. It'll go quick, but I can keep it workable in a pot for most of the day. And sometimes, as Lizelle will testify, it works great to put it in the fridge. It will last several days. Tough to see it in the fridge.
Yeah.
Really.
In the same tub as the hummus from
Oh,
Trader Joe's.
no.
On the inside note, I forgot to use this paint, I just mixed it. It's
Right.
gonna dry up.
Yeah.
I use that.
Hey, Mark,
All right, we wait confessing it.
what about the shapes? I mean, are they all hand done, or do you like create a stamp? I mean, they look so the same. Are they all
Yeah,
hand done?
that's a good point, actually. A lot of the stuff is I mask things out. I'll mask. Tools with like squeegees and things like that, so I'll squeegee the surfaces maybe, so you get something that's very textured, but then when you pull the masking off, it gets this crisp edge. So that's, I don't know how that evolved, but I ended up just drawing with masking tape a
And
lot.
then you paint over that.
Yeah, so you get these.
Edges.
You're right. So you get this kind of thing where it's very textured, but the edge is really crisp. And then when you sand it, the texture really comes out. So.
So if the one we have gets dirty, I can just kind of sand it down a little.
Oh yeah, just sand it down. Yeah, sand it down. Just stick some varnish on it. Yeah, it'll be good as new. Improved.
Is there any questions on how he goes about making his pieces or his motivation?
So the words that you wrote
Mhm.
freehand, or you had stencils or anything, the letters themselves?
No, I just did them freehand. I just kind of ruled some lines and
Oh,
just
you
did,
had
yeah, I put lines just to make sure I could fit what I wanted to fit on those panels, and then just did it freehand,
Then you covered it all.
and then cut it all up. Yeah.
And could we go back to what Matt said about this being very American? Because because of my background, maybe we talked about it before, I feel that this is very universal.
Right.
And I would like to hear some of your thoughts about that.
Yeah. Well, the sort of things that I'm interested in with all of those aspects that I mentioned about what you go through, so the whole the land and people and the relationship with that, and the relationship with building cities and settlements and all that kind of thing, I think all of that stuff is universal, and it's kind of yeah, I guess it's things like I don't know. That's a complicated question actually, but yeah, it's the universal things that drive all those things that I think is what interests me. And I think it's one of the reasons I like to make art is because life is very complicated and very fast, and there's a lot of layers to it that we've kind of added that sort of obscure the very fundamental things, which is, and the recession I think brought this home to me and to a lot of other people, that the thing that actually drives us all in our very busy, complicated Bay Area lives is we all are struggling to keep a roof over our head and food on the table. And that's a very kind of easy thing to forget about in modern, complicated life, and that's just a universal thing. So the kind of ideas about, I mean, I've done work that's been about work, about the fact that you have to work, and you have to work with the, we work the land to get what we want out of it, and all of those kind of things. It all comes back to that thing, what we really fundamentally need. So that's the kind of universal stuff. And lots of, I mean, the houses, I've always had lots of those in, used in different ways in work for quite a lot of years. And I think probably the idea of being from another country and having moved around, what it's all about. Definitely.
Any question?
So when I heard that you were doing this series, or starting to do this series, I was really excited by the idea because, like you, I'm an immigrant. I come from a farming family in Ireland, and so the big question for me is, why did I end up in America? So many people come here because they believe in the American dream, which is not something that I thought anybody should. American. Well, I think when you come out of Europe, you carry a lot of biases about what that means. And the Woody Guthrie song really helped me understand that there was something more than just the American dream about becoming American. There was the idea of belonging to the land. And for somebody who came out of a rural background, dream becomes, it's like the national mythology, and it has layers and layers and layers of interpretation. Here we have Woody Guthrie's song, and it says, this land was meant for you and me, and it's covered up in layers and layers and layers and layers of experiences, literally in the pen. Buried on the canvas here. People hear it as a song, but actually what it represents historically in America can really get lost in the midst of time. And so I think it's a wonderful combination. There's a lot going on in these paintings.
You forget that song and what it means, you know? Folks in other parts of the country where they're living on 50 acres,
Yeah.
not so much they're connected to that, and then they feel proud of that.
Yeah. But I think, we have this, we'll drive over the Richmond Bridge, and you kind of have this sort of pinch me moment where it's kind of like, am I really, don't really live in this place? Because we came here as tourists, about 15 years ago. I remember flying home thinking, wouldn't it be cool if you could live there? You know, and it was like this distant dream that you could. Oh, that is the geography of it, and the natural land, and you know, redwood forests. it's
Most
like,
people.
yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I sort of lost some of that romanticism about LA. Yeah. This dog, it's actually a coyote, the dark one, picture over there, are both kind of like digging at the ground. So it's kind of, I was, American dream too, you know.
But I think as immigrants, we all look to belong. We've left the country behind, we're arriving in a new country, we've got lots of questions about whether we're staying the first few years that we're here. And I think Woody Guthrie's song really invites you to belong in America. And so I think these paintings are really important because it does represent all the different, just literally the whole way that you describe making it and that you use.
Is the guy with the flashlight?
Yeah, it's, the figure came last in that. The first piece I did for this show, the first piece I finished was the one with the tree and the shovel over the other side. And I like the sort of. And with this, I think that with that, I've not really done trees before, unless they were really stylized into kind of almost like childlike stick trees. So I started doing a lot of sketches of plants in our backyard, and some of those sort of crept into these ones up here. And was originally going to be sort of walking off out of the picture, but then, I mean, this is kind of how I think when I'm making something. So I've got this big bold shape here, which cries out for lots of attention because it's really bright and really contrasty. So I needed something over here that was approximately that shape to kind of balance it out. And so I look at the wall I thought of ideas and things that might go into pictures, and I'm thinking, okay, well, you know, a crow's not the right shape, that's not going to work. And you know, I'll go through various options and think, well, you know, it will be a figure, but you know, what's the figure going to be doing there? And originally I was going to have this figure walking out of the painting, but then I had there's a little copy of a painting by Arshil Gorky on my wall. And he was most famous for doing sort of 50s and 60s abstract expressionist paintings. But he was gave all the food to the kids, and when he migrated with his father over to the United States, the only photo he had one photo of him with his mother, and he painted it many times, even though it wasn't the kind of style of paintings he was famous for. He painted this picture several times. So I have that on my wall just because I've always loved the painting, even before I knew the story behind it. So I lifted this figure off that painting. Partly because it just worked compositionally with the picture, but then it also kind of had all this little backstory to it, which makes it quite interesting. Although, in the painting, he's actually holding a flower. But it kind of looks a bit like a flashlight in the picture. And I did some pictures a while ago that had people with flashlights or people with like headlamps. And it was kind of interesting. I got interested in using that image again. So I kind of put the flashlight in his hand in a very sort of stylized way. Also because this kind of had a sort of glowing nighttime kind of feel to it. So I kind of like the idea of this. It's somebody in the landscape that maybe looks like a sort of suggesting it's kind of like a rural landscape, maybe.
Perhaps they have a house in there.
Right. Yeah. It's like that. Yeah. That Tom Waits song about
Tom going to the bar.
Yeah. Don't go to the bar. Yeah. So, yeah, that was the story behind that.
I'm curious about the wood, block, how did those come about?
Sculptures.
Yeah. What's it back to do with making? What is smells like? Yeah. So those, yeah, I started off actually Matt Molina's fault. Because I started off doing the little pieces for Art in a Box, and I started using offcuts from panels and bits of things. I've been building things in our backyard, and I was using offcuts and working on those for Art in a Box, and then those things gradually grew into sort of more kind of tabletop size wood pieces, and then with the show here, I knew I wanted to do big paintings. From those, and I found a place to get them and got some and thought, well, what am I going to do with them? And I had this plan that they were going to have a lot of images from paintings on them. They were going to be very busy, and they were going to have bits of metal on them. I bought these things, and they were all covered in mud and tar and stuff like that, and I cleaned them up. And when I cleaned them up, they were just so cool looking. They're just pieces of raw wood that I kind of simplified the idea. And if I was a real sculptor, I would have just left them as wood and thought of something intelligent to do with the forms of the wood. If you were walking through a dense forest, you kind of get these little glimpses of things, and then something would be blocking it out, and you get glimpses and so on. I always imagined them being grouped together in a large number like that to get that kind of effect, which is a very painful thing, not really a very sculptural thing to be interested in. But yeah, I don't know quite what I'm going to do with that next. I haven't really thought about that.
It's perfect. And it's perfect that they're off of freeway guardrails, the roads in America.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's a nice kind of circular thing that they were obviously very big mature trees in the first place, and then they became part of our freeway infrastructure, which is kind of almost the opposite of being a big mature tree, and then they're going back to becoming a kind of an abstract representation of forest.
Martin's going to do the drawings.
Yeah,
It's like creative.
essence of creation. Yeah. People's going to have a mixed reaction. Some people hate it, and some people really like it. I also really like it. It reminds me of my dad creating something in the fence when I was a kid.
I really like it.
Yeah.
There's an interesting parallel, though, the sort of the central form of the wood blocks themselves and these kind of repetitive marks that I see in a lot of your paintings, that they're kind of this almost visual building block. You know.
Definitely. But yeah, I wanted to kind of carry it over, and then when I got the pieces of wood, I wasn't sure what I was going to do with them. But as soon as I realised that I wanted to have them vertically, yeah, I realised that they were kind of like these little marks in here, and the kind of rows of marks, I think, kind of related to the rows of letters in the first place. Which kind of, echoes the idea of time passing and work being done and that sort of thing. So I was sort of conscious of them having that lots of ambiguous potential meanings, and then trying to carry it on into that pattern into the wood pieces too.
Is there any other thoughts on Martin Webb?
Well, to me, the markings are like fences, and and I see stories in your paintings, and so part of it is being the outsider and also the insider.
I've done a lot of work that's been about land and people's relationship to land and sort of how people kind of colonize the land. Because the English landscape is so manicured, it's always been, it's been managed, every square foot of it, apart from a few bits in Scotland, for centuries. But here you've got the wild landscape and, civilization kind of battling it out still, which is great. That to me is quite fascinating. So fences are a big part of that, sort of literal fences. But yeah, there's kind of metaphorical fences too, of sort of boundaries and defining areas and defining where people are and where things belong. It's all kind of very interesting stuff.
I can't end this without commenting on, to me, he has obviously evolved artwork, what he's working on in a series, and just it represents what you're doing great. You're very consistent in what you do. You have a great style that you've evolved, and how difficult that is as an artist, to get to that point. Like, I know what I'm doing, and I know what I'm doing, and I enjoy what I'm doing. And on top of that, you're an accomplished public artist. He does murals. So as an individual, he's an artist, through and through. That's what he does full time. It's not easy to do that. So how'd you pull it off? He's got a great studio in his backyard. It's outside. He's got a garden. And his just life seems really integrated with your art. It's not easy. How'd that happen? In a nutshell.
Yeah.
Work hard. He works really hard.
Having a day job that you really dislike helps. And that's partly, yes, some of it has been necessity actually. Some of it kind of like getting into public art was actually partly sort of financial necessity. And yeah, there's a lot. That's a really good question. There's a whole load of things that play into that. So yeah, that's really complicated. But yeah, no, I'm just very lucky to be able to do it. I think, and do you know Randy Kowalski? There's a Bay Area artist, Randy Kowalski. He has a big sculpture down at Uptown Sculpture Park. I was reading an interview with him online, and I really identified with it. Because he just kind of plows his own furrow, and he just says something about, I've been doing this a long time. I'm in my late 40s. I can do what the fuck I like. It's like, got no, he's not worried about being, creating stuff that fits in any niche at all. And I think that's become easier to do as I've got older, to pay less attention to what I think people are expecting you to do and what your artwork should look like. And that, which is very hard. I had a terrible time with that when I was at art school. When I left art school, I was really afraid of making art because it had been drummed into me that it had to be so conceptually sound. I make art to kind of think concept through. I tend to get a much clearer picture towards the end of making something, what it's about.
Fantastic. On that, that's a perfect end.